Welcome back, listeners and viewers. I'm Cynthia Calori,
And I'm Nicholas Wilson.
and you're listening to
This could go either way. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. Today, I think we have a pretty interesting topic.
We do have an interesting topic. I picked it. We're going to be talking about two books. Well, not even so much the books, like the books, but
I think the books are kind of our guide, right?
Yes.
For the topic, and overall, the topic is just relationships.
Yes.
Whether it's like what is it, more intimate relationships like boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, or friendships.
Yes.
Or even work, whatever kind of just relationships in general, and
with
how
your
we interact.
family, coworkers. Yeah. Absolutely. The first book, I actually have the physical copy, is Attached: The New Science of Adult Attachment and How it can help you find and keep love. And the other book is The 5 Love Languages by Dr. Gary Chapman. Now, The 5 Love Languages has been around for a long time. I think it was written back in the 90s. He did a revision. And I even did a little extra homework, and I listened to, because I didn't know, but at the end of re-listening to The 5 Love Languages, he talked about that he made a singles edition that it wasn't just like a rehatch of the original book, but it went into more detail about when you're single, how you can discover your love languages and how to practice them even though you're not in a relationship. So I listened to that as well. But yeah, just overall, before we go into it, what were your like overall thoughts of each book?
I mean, these kind of books are not necessarily like, I would not consider them to be my style. I thought, they were interesting. I think it's an interesting take. I mean, I would say generally I have issues forming relationships. Maybe that's why I find these books not my style. That probably goes a little hand in hand. I think that the love languages one, the author definitely comes from a more religious perspective. I mean, he doesn't get preachy in any way in the book, but that's obviously his background, and that's where he learned to be a therapist and things like that. A
marriage counselor, yeah.
Yeah. And then Attached does a lot of references of, actual university studies and things like that. And so you can feel like there's more of a scientific approach to that one. And then I feel like The 5 Love Languages was more kind of what he learned through experience as a marriage counselor.
Yes.
And so, I mean, they're interesting. It's not like that I didn't get anything out of them. It's like I said, it's just not necessarily, I don't know. I don't know why. I guess I'm just kind of like too cool for school or something, that's why I feel that way. But yeah, they were interesting.
Yeah. I mean, my motivation, I guess, for these is I thought it would be kind of interesting because, Nick has been in a successful marriage for the last 10 years, for sure. A healthy, successful.
11 years.
Yeah, 11 years. Oh, it's up. See, that's how good he is. Look at that, ladies. And Sandy, you're watching, listening. And my perspective is I've been single for a long time. I've been in relationships, but I've never been married. I've never had children. So it's really interesting. So I thought I was like, well, that'd be kind of interesting to talk about these. The 5 Love Languages came about when I was in a relationship with somebody that cheated on me, and I gave him a second chance. And I was trying to make that something that we did together because I was recommended to me. And then I came across this book actually through my therapist in understanding why I was having such difficulty I guess now that I know, deactivating my very anxious activated attachment system. So I didn't, it's a lot, I know. But being in the dating world, after like really listening to these books and taking them in, I feel like it's so important that if people are really trying to find somebody and start a relationship, first understanding your attachment styles, I think, crucial in starting really any relationships, but especially in dating. And then understanding your love language, and then learning all of the love languages and learning how to speak them for your partner or whomever it is. And it doesn't even always have to be your partner, but just in general, learning how to speak other people's love languages to have healthy, happy relationships. So yeah, so that was kind of my motivation. how I came across these books and why I wanted to talk about it, I guess.
Yeah.
So I guess we can start with the book Attached. And so there's 3 attachment styles. There's a 4th that the book doesn't talk about too much, and
they just say it's bad.
Yeah, they're like, stay away from that one. So I'll say what the 3 attachment styles are. There's the secure attachment style, anxious, and avoidant are the 3 attachment styles. And then the very, very rare and apparently very, very bad anxious avoidant attachment style, which you don't see them very often, but
they don't have a lot of tips for the anxious avoidant one out there, which is unfortunate considering they say it's the worst one, and then they give like no advice on either how to deal with it as that person or how to deal with those people. And they basically just like avoid them, be avoidant to the anxious avoidant.
Yeah.
That's pretty dark. I mean, to a certain extent, like just that kind of condemnation of that kind of personality type is it's a little rough, to be honest. Just thinking about it now, I'm like, I mean, it's quite an indictment of those people.
Yeah. And it's so anyway, we're going to talk about the main 3 because that's where we get the most information from. So I'll start off by pointing out that when listening to this book the first time, I definitely related for sure with the anxious attachment style. Now, when you first hear that, it does sound not great.
I mean, I would say that before I read the book, just thinking about like, well, what do I probably identify with? That's what I would actually have assumed I would have identified with.
Yeah.
My test came out, I mean, not a whole lot different, but more secure than anxious, but it was pretty close. It was like 17 and 21.
Yeah. I definitely called Nick for secure attachment style, personally, just knowing him. But yeah, and then avoidant is my ex-boyfriend. Which, if I would have known about any of this, I would have never dated him. Sorry. Not sorry. So, yeah. And, I will point out one of the things that was pointed out to me playing a little bit devil's advocate, I suppose, or just a little different perspective is when I was talking to my brother about both the 5 love languages, more so that, and a little bit of the attachment style, he got all, because he's a scientist, he's like, and those things are like horoscopes or like, the whatchamacallit, I'm totally astrology. Thank you. Because he's like, you can read them and of course you're going to identify with something. And then it starts to put you in a little box. And I'm like, all right, fair. I appreciate that.
It's certainly not as bad as astrology.
Correct. Like there's at least like,
it's not that general. They make some differences and they cite examples and they talk about like it's big picture, right? Like, it's like we can list all this stuff, but just because you pick and choose doesn't necessarily mean that's your style. That it has more to do with the overall picture and the overall engagement, and not necessarily just like a couple of the things that they point out. And so I think early in the book they really kind of emphasize that point.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget though. Like it's very easy just to pick and choose and be like, oh, I did that. Like, I'll identify with that. Like, oh, I do that, and to see yourself as, maybe a more negative, self-image.
Mm-hmm.
And you pick and choose the more negative things and then maybe question some of the more positive ones. It's an easy thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, I was appreciative learning about some of these because, like you said, you hear it and you're like, oh, I totally do that, or I've totally done that. But that's a good thing to become aware of it, because luckily in the book for Attached, they give you tips on things where you can catch it and what you can do to not, cause harm to a relationship or any type of destructive behavior. So, I'll definitely, I guess I can dive into more the anxious attachment style.
That's where they kind of start out too.
They do start it out and they do talk about it a lot. I mean, I've marked off some of the places in the book to go into the activating strategy. So they talk about for anxious attachment styles that when our attachment style is activated, this is going back, by the way, to, they were referencing back originally just like the beginning of humans. We were talking about this a little bit about how there's no self-made person or
right, not truly.
not
Like,
truly,
there's
you
nothing
know?
truly, right, because you can't there's no true self-reliant or self-made, right? I mean, I guess to say 100% no self-reliant, I mean, like 100%, like at some point you got something from somebody else, or you purchased something from society, like you gained something from society to get there, you know. Even if you decide to go out into the woods and then you end up making it on your own, foraging, and then you farm, and then whatever, you started with something that came from the outside. Most likely you weren't dropped naked and afraid. Props to them. You know, just naked in the woods and then you figured it out, right? Like, because that would be, to be 100% true. I mean, I think there's people that live self-reliantly, and that, but self-made, I think self-made overall is a myth. I mean, you can't, all the self-made people in the US, they only exist because of the US as it is. Like, if it wasn't
Like
the country that it is and the connections that they have, and then the infrastructure and all of that, they would never have what they have.
Yeah.
You know?
So pointing that out, that's why these attachment styles started with just how we survive as humans and how we attach with others in general, right? So, and some of the things that really pointed out, like with anxious, part of the chapter is called Living with a Sixth Sense of for Danger, which is true, because I will say I've definitely noticed that when I'm starting to get attached to an individual, that when they're not meeting my needs that I have just naturally, that I start to have some of these activating strategies. They talk about like thoughts and feelings that compel you to seek closeness with your partner. And I definitely experienced that. And if you do out there as well, it's totally normal. And by the way, one of the things I really appreciate about this book is they talk about knowing these things about you, and especially because anxious attachment styles are regularly, oh, they're too needy, they just want too much and there's never enough, right?
Like they reference like, you know, like the like self-help type stuff that tells you not to be reliant on others and not to be needy, and that's the way to find somebody, or yada yada yada.
But the problem is, if you're not true to this knowing that you need to basically we need to
being true to yourself,
yeah,
right?
we need to be true to ourselves, that when you have that fake approach of, oh, I'm fine, I don't, you know, you call me when you want to, and you know, and kind of leave it up to the other individual, that you're sending the wrong signals, because eventually anxious attachment styles start going, oh, well, we've been together now and I'm going to start showing my true colors, and that person, because we've been together, is going to understand that, and it turns out that just backfires on you in the long run. So I just want to point out that when you feel that need, and even though you might have been called needy, you know, it's always something more, that's okay. I would be true to that, because according to this, it's just going to help you find the right partner faster than denying those feelings. And so, but it's normal that if you're not with the right partner, that you start, you know, thinking about your mate constantly, and you have difficulty concentrating on other things. This one's important, because I've done this so many times where I'm with guys and they have red flags, but when my attachment system is activated, all I can remember is the good things, just the great things that happen, right? I'll never, those red flags are like out the window. And then putting them on a pedestal, and then it makes me underestimate my talents and abilities and overestimating theirs. Anxious feelings that only go away when I reconnect with them, which is true. I experience all these things. It's wild. The believing that this is my only chance for love, like
catastrophizing.
Believing that though you're unhappy, you better not let go, because it'll be worse if you're alone, right? So, or like he can change, all couples have problems, we're not special in that regard. So those were some of the things that originally, when I was listening to the book, I'm like, oh my gosh, I've experienced all these things before.
I mean, you know, I think that's why sometimes I identify with the anxiety, because I have, you know, like generalized anxiety, and so those are all like symptoms of anxiety, pretty much. Yeah. So, but I guess you can be both an anxious person and have a secure attachment style. I guess, I don't know, but that's probably why I scored also reasonably high on the anxious attachment style as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's, again, I appreciate, so any of those things sound familiar, experience that, don't worry, it's okay. But it's all about too, like, the problem is that we have these things and then we go into what's called protest behavior. And oh my gosh, I am such a, that's why I think I've had so many of the guys I've dated call me brats. And I'm
That's
like,
kind of the common thing that, like, right, that's
yeah,
that's often the accusation that you're being, you're acting
too needy,
childish or
childish,
needy
I'm a
or
brat. And after listening to this book, I'm like, no, 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 no. That's because something's wrong with you, not me. But
well, I think I like how they, they talk about, if you're dealing with somebody that has an anxious attachment style, sometimes it really doesn't take all that much to calm those kind of emotions, right? That is it in this one where they talk about that, like one of them was anxious, one of them was avoidant, and so then it was just like, well, can I send you like a default text message occasionally, like I'm like when I'm thinking about you, I can just send you this kind of like generic message that I'm thinking about you, and that waylaid a lot of the fears and a lot of that anxiousness that
mm-hmm.
she was feeling. So sometimes, generally speaking, a lot of these things are actually reasonably easy to overcome.
Yes.
As long as you're aware that you have that and you can communicate that out, that's what you need. But then people have to be receptive of it too. And I think society in general doesn't, at least the US, like American society, is very much about individualism and about self-reliance. You have to do everything yourself, and every failure in your life is your fault. I mean, I believe in personal accountability to an extent as well, but getting past that idea a little bit is what's important, right?
Yeah.
At least for the anxious attachment style, dealing with it and being it is that understanding that who you are is okay, who that person is okay, and that they're, just because they want some reassurance doesn't necessarily mean they're overly needy. It just means that, they have this anxiety, and it's got a real simple solution overall. It's just tell them that you like them.
Yeah. Be there for them. Listen, communicate.
Well, that's what, that's what like the ultimate the book culminates in, right?
Yes.
Is that it's all about effective communication.
Yeah, like it's all about understanding your attachment style, expressing your expectations, and work with that partner in regards to that.
That's probably why you saw me as secure, because I just can't not say stuff pretty much about anything and everything.
Yeah,
so.
You've always had a very but you're very good at always calming that situation, I guess. So that's why I was like, yeah, I mean,
I guess I don't always feel like that. I am always a calming presence. Sometimes I feel like I'm just good at creating logic loops that people can't necessarily get around.
There you go.
But I don't know necessarily if that's always a positive.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you and I being friends, I mean, it is definitely very clear in the book that anxious attachments need to be with secure attachments.
It's funny too, because we were talking about this beforehand, because if just without having read the book, just hearing those concepts, I would have pegged you as more secure and me more anxious, just because I feel, at least personally, I feel like you form relationships with people much more readily than I do. But I tend to find people that are good at that. Oliver described it this way. I try to describe it to him as like, I was like, you have like the gift of gab. And he's like, well, I don't really feel that way. He's like, I would say you do, but what I'm good at is reading the room. Mm. And so that's what I probably say you were good at as well, is that you're able to get in there, right? Yeah. And you're able to talk to anybody or whatever. And so he feels like he can't carry on the conversation, but he can get it started. Yeah. I definitely feel like I'm terrible about getting it started, especially if I don't know you.
Yeah.
If I know somebody, I'm more comfortable, and then.
Yeah, I've always had that knack, but I think I might do that because I do like to, because an anxious attachment is looking for relationships and loyalty and things that can blossom and be special. So I guess I'm used to kind of putting myself out there, but when it comes to and it's easier to do it. It kind of works for me because I like the part of the book where they were doing some of the studies that, so anxious attachments have this habit of I can and it's true when they were talking, I can quickly feel and sense, even just in an expression or body language, when the other person's emotions are turning, And they talk about in the book that can be like where we jump to conclusions very quickly, anxious attachments.
It's like your empathy kind of gets the better of you sometimes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they talk about that with anxious attachments. If you just gave it a few beats longer, then instead of just like he didn't call me back, he's with another woman. I know, like you start jumping to the conclusions because my brain works very fast in that way. Like I will start jumping, and I'll create a whole freaking story in my head, and then, but I've learned that and I've backed up and be like, why am I'm catastrophizing it? I'm like making up the story, and you just back up a few beats because if they talk about if you just back up a few beats or give it a few extra beats, that you'll have a uncanny ability to really read other people and work to your advantage, which is probably why I've been very good in sales for a very long time.
Well, and it's just real quick. If anybody hears some weird crunching or cracking sound, that is my dog Biscuit chewing on some sort of animal remnant, bone or hoof. Just, it's not your headphones. It's not the recording. It is Biscuit on the recording. But
that's what he looks like.
I think so much of this is apparent in our differences, right? Like talking about how you form relationships better, but then you're also really good at sales. And I fucking hate sales. And
He does.
I would say you're probably a little easier to sell too.
Oh yeah, I'm a sucker for sales.
Oh my god, if you try to sell me shit, I'm gonna shut down.
Me, I'm like, if the more money I have, the more it's gonna leave.
Well, I have no problem spending money. That's not the issue. But I just don't want to talk to. I don't want. I hate it when people try to sell me on stuff. It's just like, all right, like I'm not gonna go shopping for anything I don't already know specifically what I want. Yeah. And then I just want you to give me the facts. I don't want you to try and buff it up or whatever. Like do the salesman thing. It was just not my jam,
I mean, no, I understand. I mean, well, now that I've been in sales for so long, and I know I've known and associated and worked with and trained with some top performers, I enjoy the experience of being sold by somebody that's good. Now, I get annoyed when I'm like, ugh, they're trying to, like, when it's like, wait a minute, where's the guy that's good at what he does here? I'll rather buy it from him.
I don't
at least
need
it's
the
gonna
trainee.
Yeah, I was like, I at least want a fun experience, if you're going to take my money, make me feel good about it, like, don't practice your sales skills on me. But yeah, so I don't even know where we're going to go with that. Oh yeah, so I do have some things to say. So just some basic things. I do recommend to listen to Attached or read it. I listened to it. That was a little bit easier for me. I mean, I have the book for notes and stuff, but I like listening. I know you're more of a reader than a listener.
Yeah, I don't feel like I have a whole lot of time where I sit and listen. So reading is usually easier for me to focus on.
Yeah. So either way, I do recommend it. But a couple things I got from it. Okay, if you're anxious attachment, understand that you have protest behaviors. Things like keeping score. Like, well, he hasn't texted me back. He took 15 minutes to text me back, so I'm going to take 30 minutes. What were some of the other ones? Drawing, and pulling away, acting hostile. That was me in my younger years.
Like starting fights and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And just be like, trying to get attention. I don't think that's listed specifically as that.
Excessive attempts to reestablish contact.
That's where
text after text and a call. I've never done actually any of that.
But that's probably where I think that's probably where some of the childish complaints come in, right? Like when you get a little overboard just because you're trying to get that attention, right?
You're trying to reestablish the connection to calm your attachment style. But the reason I wanted to point that out is because apparently it's extremely common that anxious attachments confuse falling in love with like the passion. Basically, they think when they're attached, they get so accustomed to it that when their attachment system is activated and they're around that person, they feel that that's a form of like, it's excitement, it's love. They must be falling in love with that person. But what they're doing is their system's just activated and they're confusing love with passion. And what they mention in the book that's very difficult to do, but it's something to just start being aware of, is when you're ever with somebody and you're calm, even though you might think they're boring, that's probably the best person, or at least somebody that you should try to have a relationship with, because that calm is actually normal, and that means your activating system's not being, well, I mean, your attachment system's not being activated. I just thought that was really important because I'm like, yeah, I definitely found myself, if I've met other guys and I'm like boring.
Everybody likes drama, right? Like that's why reality TV works.
Which means I think there's just a lot of people with anxious attachment styles, but it's just because it's true, because you go through it over and over and over, and when you start becoming an adult, a young adult, or an adult, a not young adult, what the hell does that mean anyway?
Hey, if you're still with us, go ahead and take this chance to like and subscribe, and please enjoy the rest of the show.
But the point is, you it's almost like you keep going through those experiences, so you start to confuse an activated attachment system because it becomes normal, because you keep hooking up and being around starting relationships with the wrong people, and you start associating that with like actual love, or like there's something there. So I thought that was important. Another thing I thought came out is when you're dating, how they talk about that it's much more likely that the dating pool has a lot more avoidant, because they're in and out of relationships faster, and so they're much more heavily in the dating pool, where secures, right, after they break up, take a lot more time before they go back into the dating pool.
Well, and less likely to jump around, right? The avoidants are much more likely to jump around, so since they can never stay in a relationship, they're much more likely to be single, so then they're going to be in the pool, right? And then anxious people tend to hold on, so then they're less likely to be in the dating pool as well.
Yeah.
So I mean, it makes sense that the avoidance would be the most common people in the dating pool. They never really talked about, I feel like, avoidance and avoidance together.
Well, they say of all the studies they've done all over the years, they've never had any couples that were avoidant.
Well, I mean, it makes sense, I guess, because then they don't really want to be with anybody, so then they're just like, well, no, thank you.
Bye. And then, because there's not enough glue. That's why anxious and avoidant end up together a lot, because there's that constant, like, the anxious is going in and the avoidance pulling back, and it becomes like this cat and mouse kind of thing, It's
the drama, right?
Yeah, so, and you get addicted.
It's the interesting part of it.
Yeah, but it's actually extremely devastating and hurtful and exhausting, But so I just wanted to point that out. And also, the other effed up thing is I actually recently had this happen where, because now that I'm like in the dating game a lot, I'm trying to put it out there, like what my love language is and what my attachment style is, but I'm always working on my attachment, because being aware of this helps you stop self-sabotaging and stop some of these protest behaviors. So I've definitely become much more aware of it. It's also crazy how I had a guy recently, he told me he was a secure attachment. This motherfucker was anything but that in the end. He was an avoidant. And I think he did that because, well, he's fucking avoidant. So that's another thing just to be careful of. It's like not gaslighting exactly, but
I mean, it's hard to say. Was he in denial of what he was, or was he purposefully trying to misrepresent himself, just to get laid, kind of thing?
I mean, I think he showed some signs of secure, but it's like,
I'm sure everybody has a few.
Yeah, but I think like when in the beginning of a relationship, that's the other thing that's interesting, is like knowing this information is helpful if you really want to be in a relationship, but it can also be a little damaging when you use it to manipulate somebody. Because I feel like that's what he was maybe trying to do, is put off like he was secure, but he really was an avoidant in the end. 100, like all the signs that talk about with avoidance, big time.
Self-reflection can be tough. It can be hard to really be honest with yourself about what you are.
Yeah, I feel like I would imagine, especially with avoidance. Like,
and then did he really read the book, right? Because then obviously, like,
I could have just listened to a podcast.
I obviously misdiagnosed myself as anxious. But if I follow their test, then my style ended up being more secure. So, and then that's how you would have seen me. So I think sometimes the self-assessment part is probably pretty tough, especially if you haven't actually read the book and you're just kind of going off of like, oh, well, it's anxious, avoidant, or secure. Well, I think I'm this.
Yeah, which is fair. But I don't know. If you're listening to this, just so you know, that was fucked up. You said that. It's true. So anyway, I just want to point these things out because it does turn out, and according to their statistics, that women, now it's very common that people think women are more likely to be the anxious. And I know I am here, but I feel like I have some secure traits too. So I don't take that away from myself. But now I know the reason I think I'm more of an anxious, I mean, I am, is because every time I'm with the wrong person and I keep ending up with avoidance, all these, my attachment system keeps getting activated. And then I start having all these protest behaviors and behaving that way. And now when that happens, I'm like, delete, like, you're out of my phone, out of the dating thing, because the fact that I'm already getting activated, you are definitely an avoidant or something.
But I think society, like, I think they kind of talk about this too, that like society kind of leads us to believe that women are anxious and that men are avoidant.
Yes, but it turns out that more women than men are secure attachments, according to their statistics of all the studies they've done.
I mean, to me, I think that makes sense. I mean, I think societally speaking, that men, at least in the U.S., that men aren't really encouraged to be in touch with their emotions. To be self-reflective. I mean, that just makes logical sense that if you would, how boys and girls are raised, at least in the past, that avoidancy would be kind of the goal of being a man.
The masculinity of it,
Right, and that your goal is to get laid, right, and you're, not have attachments, right, and then, then society would also put that on women, that your self-worth is defined by your ability to find somebody, right? And so that probably creates avoidance more commonly in men. It probably may create more anxious, more women to be anxious, but gives them the opportunity to be more secure because they have that ability to, or they're given that opportunity rather, to be more self-reflective and to have emotions and express them without being condemned for it or being shamed for it.
Yes, and it's interesting because in the book, they do talk about at one point, can you learn to become a secure attachment, and or are you born with it? Like what? So the thing is, they said the answers are just very unclear. Like if you were born that way, if it was because of how your mother and your parents were with you as a child,
right? Nature versus nurture,
or just all of your personal experience. So that's why I feel like now that I'm becoming aware of these things, that I'm gonna work personally more on secure style, and some of the things you can do to be a more secure attachment. But they also warn that it's even secure attachments, if they're in the wrong relationships and they're with the wrong people and they're not aware of it, that they can actually switch from being secure to anxious or secure to avoidant.
Nothing's set in stone, right?
Yeah, nothing's set in stone. So even if you make a self-assessment now, just you have to be aware of those things. And I almost think, even when that part of the book came up, the reason I'm pointing that out is because I almost feel like that might have happened to me. Like I feel like I was always, like, especially probably when he and I met over 20 years ago, I think I was more of a secure attachment person. And I think through relationships that I was in and just life experience, I think it started shifting more to anxious. And I kept experiencing that over and over. So I think that might have been what happened for me personally. So, but I just want to point out though, there's a lot of avoidance out there, apparently a lot. So I want to point these things out to know what avoidant means, like what kind of traits, right? So in the book, so just like when I talk about, you remember with like anxious attachment styles, they have, when their attachment style is activated, these behaviors come about, right?
Right. And avoidance basically the opposite of things that anxious, right?
Yeah.
So
they do deactivating strategies and that's things like, yes. So it's saying or thinking, I'm not ready to commit, but staying together regardless. Focusing on small imperfections in your partner, the way they talk, dress, eat, and pining after the ex. They call it the phantom ex. I've never experienced that with an avoidant, but I'm sure it exists.
Well, I mean, they just may not have been vocal.
That's true. They might not have ever said it, but that's just, flirting with others, not saying I love you, pulling away when things are going well. I call that the self-sabotage, because it's a form of them staying in control and keeping their autonomy and their space. forming relationships with an impossible future, like with someone who's married, checking out mentally, keeping secrets and leaving things foggy, and avoiding physical closeness. So if you've experienced that or are currently experiencing that, or if that sounds like you, red flags. I think those are the epitome of red flags, big time. And the book makes it sound like avoidants have a much, much harder road
to
fix themselves.
Because it comes from that self-reflection, right?
Yeah.
Like it's probably harder to acknowledge that you're an avoidant when you're an avoidant, right? Because, you tend to focus on the negatives, you blame others, right? It's their fault.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, they're not as good as this last person. So, that's why this is falling apart. They make excuses, and that's, to create the space because they're too afraid of, the intimacy. So they put that space in there and blame others. So I could see that it makes sense, right? If you're not being self-reflective, so then how do you make the self-reflective change if you're not making that effort to look at it, as opposed to like anxious people who are thinking about themselves too much, right? And just like always thinking about the worst things about themselves and seeing the good and seeing only the good in the others,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's much easier to then, I think it's probably much easier to then talk to yourself and be like, all right, well, maybe it wasn't all good.
Yeah.
And then it's like, they say for the avoidance, it's when it's over that they can then reflect a little bit back and see the positive. That's where like the pining for the ex comes from, right?
Yeah.
Where then they come in and then they see like, well, oh, they were so great or yada, 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 but now it's over.
It's over.
But then you get back and then you see only the negatives again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And
so that's just this like endless cycle. And
they think they're over it and then they go back.
Yeah.
Right?
And, I was wondering with him, I told him like, well, one of the things I wanted to bring up is like, okay, well then if someone's like cheating on their spouse or their partner, what category do they fall in? Like when they're supposed to be with one person, but they're also having a relationship with somebody else. Is that also like, I was like, but I think you said it earlier. You're like, well, that has to be traits of an avoidant.
I would assume so, because it's
because they don't talk about it in the book, which I thought was kind of interesting.
But I guess you could see like an anxious person probably also being in that situation. Or I guess really anybody. I don't think that this is a blank check for defining all people, right?
Yeah, fair.
That, especially since it can be somewhat fluid, right? So there is a little bit of leeway in, frankly, everybody can be a piece of shit at times, right? So I think it's possible that you could
You're cheating on somebody you care about, you're a piece of shit.
Yes. Well, I would say you probably don't necessarily really care about them all that much, in my point of view.
I've tried to like, when someone's like, well, I really love and care about that person. I'm like,
but I'm actively fucking them over.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like you've already broken that person's heart and they don't even know it yet. And you don't give a shit, but yet you say, yeah, which again, but I just, that's why I was like, what attachment style is that exactly?
I guess it could be anxious too, where you just you don't have the wherewithal to end it, even though you know that that's not the relationship you want, and so you're attached.
Because you're like you're scared of being alone.
I could see it both ways. That it could come from either. I think it probably depends on how you do it, right? I don't know. I guess I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what their thoughts on it are.
Yeah. So, by the way...
Maybe it's the anxious avoidant. Maybe that's why they don't talk about it very much.
That's why they don't talk about it. So there's apparently the fourth, remember we mentioned in the beginning, the anxious avoidant.
They basically don't mention it at all except stay the fuck away. Like, that's the only thing. They don't even really give you a good way to assess who might be that. Yeah,
because they give examples over and over and over in the book. They even do a part of the book, which I kind of liked, which I was terrible at. But the part where they're like, all right, and they give you this scenario of like a guy or woman that says these things, and you had to guess. You aced it.
Oh yeah.
I think I got like a D. So I was like only I was
reading like halfway through, and I was like, yeah, that's this.
No, not me. Because I was listening to it. I'm like, oh, it's like secure. They're like anxious. I'm like, damn it. I was like, oh, I'm fucking way off. And I'm so good at reading people, but apparently not attachment style.
You're good at reading the people, not necessarily the description, right?
Yeah.
And it was meant to trip you up, right? Like they're throwing certain things out that, oh, this will seem secure, and then I've always been a good test taker, so I think that's probably why. You know,
I mean, I'm a good test taker. At least I used to be. But I think too, like they're like, well, like one of them, there it was an avoidant, and they're like, it was all in the things they didn't say. I'm like, God damn it! I'm like, like, how am I supposed to know that? I'm like, whatever. I hate this test.
The great part of jazz is the notes they don't play.
It's the silence that the notes and the music comes from that's really music. You know, like, oh, God damn it. All right. I get it. I appreciate it. But anyway, it was just, but yeah. So we brought up this. Now, the last thing I'll finish with this, because, and again, I wanted to start with this because, of course, before you can really care about any love languages, you better be attached to the right person. So clearly the best to be is secure. Well, I don't know. They also said too about anxious, like if anxious and secure are together, anxious actually become very like wonderful partners and very loyal and committed. And
if you're not secure, the best to be with is secure.
Yeah.
That was kind of their assessment, that secure and secure is fine, but if you're not secure, then you really want to be with a secure, because they're gonna help not
activate your attachment system,
right? Not and then provide you, like if you're an avoidant, provide you some space and be willing to provide you the space that you need without taking offense to it.
Yeah, without feeling. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like how like an anxious attachment would. Yeah, because they talk about the secure being like great conflict busters. Like they don't feel the need to act defensively or injure or punish their partner. Mentally flexible. They're not threatened by criticism. Effective communicators. That's a big one. Not game players. And comfortable with closeness, unconcerned about boundaries, quick to forgive, inclined to view sex and emotional intimacy as one. Treat their partners like royalty. See, that's what I'm looking for over here. Secure in their power to improve the relationship, responsible for their partner's well-being. You know, which now they do point out in the book that secures don't always end up with the right people either, despite all those things. But
it doesn't mean secures are always good people.
Yeah, it doesn't. Exactly. This is just their style of attachment. So
I think what it comes down to is what they, I think really what everything comes down to in the book is where they kind of tie it in the end is about effective communication, right? If you're an anxious person, or if you're an anxious attachment style, just be like, this is what I need from you. If you're not willing to provide that, let's just get it out in the open now.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I need. It's not, and I think, if you've been self-reflective enough, you're not going to be making demands that are too extreme. Right. Like, I just need to know probably on a regular basis that, you're thinking about me, or that you miss me when I'm not there. Just throw it out there occasionally so that I know I know it's there.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why I think they said that secures are so good for non-secures, is that they have less issues making effective communication and speaking, being direct. And I would say I'm a pretty direct person. Being direct and saying exactly what you want, which I'm not, but then sometimes I'm not always good at talking about everything.
And that's fair. I don't even think that has to
nobody's 100%, right?
Like, yeah, I don't even think that would have to do with your attachment style either.
Just all the mental illness.
It happens. We all have our qualms and issues and whatever.
So, how do you think that leads into the languages?
So now that you know how you attach with partners and people, now it's all about knowing your love language. So do you want to introduce the 5 love languages, Nick?
Let's see if I can. I don't even know if I can remember them off the top of my head.
I have them written here, but you can see.
What is it? It's acts of service.
Got it. That's one.
Touch.
Physical touch. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, I'm gonna blank on the rest of them, I think.
Words of affirmation.
Oh, yeah.
Gift giving. Quality time. So, what's your love language? What did you feel like you?
I struggled with being able to pick any specific one that really overall I feel like would be my specific style or love language. I mean, I felt like it depends on where I'm at any given time. I may need all of this. I guess probably lower on the list I
Well,
guess
like
at the top two
like,
would be
well,
acts of service and physical touch, probably.
I mean, like, well, he talks about, Dr. Gary Chapman talks about, like, whatever you feel like you complain about.
I kind of complain a lot though, so
Well, what do you complain about?
I complain about. I mean,
You don't have to get too personal,
that's
but
probably a better question to ask Sandy. But
Sandy, what does he complain about? Just comment in the section.
too much. I guess probably if I were to be forced to pick, it would have to be somewhere between acts of service. I guess
I would
maybe
guess
acts of
acts of
service.
service.
Maybe acts of service.
I feel like you're an acts of service kind of guy.
You know, physical touch, and not just in like the sexual sense of physical touch. I think is also pretty important to me. I mean, at the very least, it's like a secondary language.
Yeah.
You know, is maybe not my primary. It's tough though, because I just feel like it's more contextual. You know, that all five definitely have. You know, I want.
Well, right.
You
So
know, at
now
some
they
point.
talk about that if you know how to speak all these languages and you have a hard time figuring out which one, that there's a chance you grew up in a household that all five love languages were spoken.
Which I could see that
maybe
for
see
sure.
that, you know, knowing your mom and dad, you know.
Yeah.
I could see that. I did not grow up in a house like that, but I just want all of these anyway. So all five love languages are mine. But I saw a meme one time. I was trying to find it for the show. It was hilarious. They're like, my love language is tell me I'm beautiful, buy me flowers and show it, touch me all over, buy me everything that I want, and do it all the time. Like, I don't know. I was cracking up. It was better than that, but I was like, yeah, I can relate.
Because I mean, like the quality time, it's like I feel like that one's a lot about being listened to.
Depending on your dialect, because there's dialects too.
Right, that's true. I think I feel like being listened to, like, and not just being, I don't know necessarily how you want to phrase it. Some people might phrase it as being heard or being listened to, and not just hearing my words, but actually, you know, being able to pay attention and listen to what I'm saying and taking me at my word, right? Like that what I'm telling you is how I feel and is what I want. Like that is very important to me as well. I think acts of service to an extent can be important. Like if it's something that I've expressed to you that I want, then that becomes important. You know, so maybe quality time then, in the sense that I like to be listened. That's why I had such a hard time.
Yeah,
I could go in
depends,
circles
yeah.
about all.
Well, there was even the question, because I had listened. I only got halfway through, but the singles edition of this, and he does hash into this more, that because somebody asked him, they're like, Dr. Chapman, is there a chance that you give love one way, but you want to be reciprocated love in a different way? And he's like, yeah, that can be the case, where you happen to show love in a certain way. Like you might be an acts of service for whatever reason, but you truly need to have the quality time, you know? So there's a chance that because he said he's definitely seen that. But again, I don't know why that was in the singles version, but whatever.
I will say the one thing that rubbed me really the wrong way in this book was there was the one case where the husband was kind of just like an asshole, and all he wanted was sex from his wife.
Yeah, I remember there was a couple of those. I feel.
But this one was real specific, where he's like, you should just have sex with him. And because that's what he says he wants, even though you're not emotionally involved in it. And maybe that will get him to turn around. And I just thought that was bad advice.
I know. I thought that part was a little fucked up.
Yeah, that I think
there
there's a fair amount in the
there,
book that you can take that's positive, but
yes,
that one thing like really stuck out to me. I even highlighted it on my Kindle because I was like, this is fucked up. Like that one part. So, Dr. Gary Chapman, if you do ever listen to this, I think that's fucked up to tell somebody that they should just bang somebody that they don't want to bang.
Yeah, well, I mean, regardless of a marriage, I mean, you know, that's like
it's basically non-consensual.
It's not exactly,
you know, almost. I mean, she's obviously she's instigating, like he's telling her to instigate it, but I don't know. That one to me just it really rubbed me the wrong way.
I know. I remember listening to that. I'm like, is he telling her that it's okay that she's basically being raped by her husband that she doesn't have feelings for anymore is okay to try to mend their marriage.
Supposedly it worked, I guess. That was, that was his, like, because it was like, he did like a 6-month experiment, right? Where and he's like, you need to make sure. So like, I can't even remember what else he told her to do because that would just stuck out with me so much. But
I don't remember either.
Because they're all because in both these books they do a lot of things as like different scenarios, right? And they give you stories. For me, it's hard to read those stories and feel like they're all believable.
Well, like there's definitely some of them he had to lay it out a little, like
details.
Yeah, of course, because I feel like he had to make it very like black and white to separate the issues. But to be fair, maybe that's because as a marriage counselor, that's how his listening skills and brain works to assess issues in a marriage. Because I can imagine the couples for real, like the bickering back and forth when they're like with him.
He's got to simplify
and he has to
bit.
Like sift out all the and go, okay, it sounds like this is for you and this, and for the book's sake, obviously none of us want to listen to examples of people bickering.
Right. So, and he's sticking to, I get it, he's sticking to the relevant information and I'm just being picky about details, I guess.
That's fair.
Because sometimes it was like, it's like, oh, and I told him to do this and then everything was better.
Yeah.
Because I think people are more complicated than that.
Right.
And that's,
I mean, I can see where knowing this, I think the important part is like figuring out what your love language is. Like truly my real one is like, hell yeah, I want all of them. That'd be awesome. But it's quality time, hands down. Like I think that's the most important thing of all of them, because people giving you their time is like the ultimate gift. Like, cause you can't ever get that back. You can go buy more, make more money. You can come up with all the words of affirmation you want, and obviously acts of service. Well, shit's got to get done around the house either way. What the hell is that all about? But anyway, like they're like, doing laundry is her love language. I'm like, the laundry's got to get done either way.
He's like, so I hated vacuuming growing up, but then my wife wanted me to vacuum, so I started vacuuming. Like that was one of his stories.
I know, and you're like, and now I vacuum all the time, and she loves me, or what? I'm like, whatever. These shit. That's why I'm saying. And then physical touch, probably my second, because of being affectionate. But that's what I'm saying. But quality time, I don't know. I've always felt like giving your time and true time. But I do appreciate the different dialects. Like yours is being listened to. Mine's like doing things together. It doesn't necessarily have to be crazy adventures, but just like being together and like actively doing something,
Right, which I find important too.
Yeah.
I think that the physical touch one is always, I think that one's tough because I think a lot of people probably initially identify with physical touch because of sex, right? Like that's, but that's not necessarily even the most relevant part of that language, right? Like I think when he talks about that one, it's like a lot of the little stuff, being affectionate.
Like shoulder rubs, like, or when people just
holding
like to
hold
a
hand,
hands.
or just like, when you're upset, coming up and rubbing your back or something like that, Like, and I find that one important too. Like, I think physical touch is, for me, is like, that's, that's a reminder that you're there, that you're not, that you're there for me.
Yeah.
And that, so that's why I put that one kind of high as well. Because it's like, it's that kind of stuff, obviously sex is important in a relationship, but it's not the end all. But I do think the other types of physical contact, to an extent, are more important.
Well, yeah, like in the singles edition, they flesh it out a little bit more. Like when you look at look at physical touch, how it's also sometimes certain like points in your life. Like think about, a soccer team or a baseball team when they all achieve something together. They're jumping all over each other, hugging and wrestling, but like playful. That like those moments, physical touch is huge. Like that, high five, stuff like that. Like that's a time where physical touch would, even if that's not your primary love language, but in that scenario, that is the love language,
It's a big deal. I just maybe, I don't know why this specifically popped in my head, but it was an old Jackie Chan movie. It might have been Meals on Wheels. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was like an old Chinese production Jackie Chan movie. And he was having like I don't know, one of his mates or whatever or his buddies, and they were, I don't know why I got like Australian there for a second. You use mates for friends, but
I know. Maybe
I don't know if I've ever said that before
in that context. Go with it. If you're still with us, don't forget to check us out on social media. We're on Instagram and Twitter. Now back to the show.
So they were like
Good
chatting.
day,
He's
mate.
like, yeah, he's like betting. One of his friends is like betting him. He's like, I bet you can't give her a kiss, get her to kiss you. And he's like, oh, I bet I can get her to hug me. And it was just the idea that the physical touch of a hug was something considered to be an even greater achievement than just like a kiss, because in a lot of cultures, like a kiss is a greeting, right? But a hug is much more intimate. You're much more close. Much more of you is touching.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a full embrace.
Well, that hugging, he talks about that for like going again, time and a place with physical touch is when there's somebody's grieving. Yeah. That really the best thing for somebody that's grieving is to be held, like in a hug, and maybe even a long one. Like there's, even though that might be somebody that doesn't normally hug a lot, but during those times, it's pretty crucial for them to feel like somebody's
you gotta read
there
the room. You gotta read the room though, because if you're not really know that, like I'm not a big person. I don't really like people that I don't know touching me. I'm not a big fan of like, oh, we just met all these people and let's hug before we leave.
Yeah, see, I hug everybody. So.
If I don't know them, I'm like, I participate because I don't want to be, I'm too anxious to not participate. But like, so Sandy had me for our daughter's birthday, she wanted to get her nails done. So she had me go with. And so she made me get a manicure and a pedicure. And I was not a fan because there was a lot of touching going on. And I was pretty uncomfortable most of the time. Yeah. So it's like, I don't know if that ties into physical touch being, part of my language at all, because I see more aspects of physical touch as being more intimate than necessarily, being less important.
Well, that's why, then there's a chance physical touch isn't as high on your list, because in the singles edition, again, it's interesting because some of the things he fleshes out in the singles edition still apply all over. But because when people are single and they're trying to not only learn their love language, but also learn how to speak others, they talk about, practicing with family and coworkers, friends. So if it's true for you that physical touch makes you feel more uncomfortable.
Well, family's friends, people I know well, it's not a big deal.
All right.
If it'd be with like
complete strangers.
Yeah, so like some woman at a nail salon giving me like a leg massage is weird to me.
Well, it's also, I guess that makes sense. It's like I don't want to be stuck with somebody giving my quality time to somebody I don't really know. I'll be like, there's a lot of other better things I could be doing.
Like, this is weird and uncomfortable. I don't want to, but I gotta sit here because I'm here now, and I don't feel like I can say anything or get up and whatever,
Gonna sit here and be like,
just I could try not to look at them too much because you feel uncomfortable, but then like you don't want to look away too much either because then that's just like weird.
Just pretend you're sleeping.
Yeah. See, like, I'm just. This is why I initially saw myself as an anxious attachment style, because a lot of interpersonal interactions make me very anxious.
I think that has to do with more of you just being weird.
Yeah, that's fair. No, that's fair.
I mean, I'm weird too. Like, well, I'm the type of person I'll know somebody for a little bit, and because we somehow connected on something, I'm like, give me a hug. I'm like, why the hell did I just do that? But I just do that, so it might be strange for.
Is there alcohol usually involved?
Sometimes there is, and sometimes I am stone sober.
Well, I would probably be more likely to hug it when there's alcohol involved.
Well, of course, everybody's hugging everybody when there's alcohol involved.
Yeah, but that goes to what I was saying before too, right? Like I think you have a knack for forming relationships just more readily.
I'm good at the beginnings of relationships.
That's what I was talking about with Oliver, right? Like
for very, very, very long periods of time.
Relationships take a lot of work to maintain.
I mean, I guess I am because I have you and I have other longtime friends.
I have so many, man. To keep in contact with, how many people.
I mean, I know that's true. It's good I don't have a ton, but the reality is it's not like I sometimes don't give myself the credit that I know how to have a solid relationship with individuals for a long period of time.
Yeah, and you can go long. I know you have a few people that you can go long periods of time without necessarily communicating with them, but you still have the connection, and this when you do communicate, it's like it was yesterday.
Yeah, it's like no time has passed.
Yeah,
so
and that's what they're like, true friendship, right?
Yes, exactly. So I definitely have that capability, but I sometimes forget to give myself that credit, because then I'm like, well, what the hell's wrong with me that I can't find a partner? But it also turns out I'm really picky. But I'm okay with that, because it turns out that's
being picky, right? You don't want to settle.
Yeah, but now that I'm getting older, I sometimes think of that Seinfeld episode where, like, well, did you see her hands? Like I start nitpicking on weird things sometimes, or
maybe you got a little avoidant in there. Maybe your anxious history has turned you a little avoidant.
I mean, there's
to pick those little things,
That's true. Like, that's where I feel like maybe I'm a little avoidant in some sense.
Because that's not really picky necessarily, right? Like, because you're not, if you're picking on little things like their hands.
I'm just saying that wasn't their hands.
I know it wasn't their hands, like, literally, but if it's something inconsequential,
yes,
and you're, is that really being picky in the sense that you're trying to find the right person, or is that more of an avoidant trait you're afraid of getting hurt again or getting into a situation, right?
But it's like, okay, I mean, my pickiness. I'd like them to have a great job, where they make good money. And not that I need them to be wealthy, but I don't know, like, and I
steady work is important.
Yes, I feel like it's really important.
Is important.
I feel like
whether it's more or less, right? It doesn't necessarily, as long as they can live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not having a fucking roommate. I'm like, every freaking guy ever. And San Diego is expensive. Yeah, I know. But come on, like, that means all the time you have to come to my place because I live alone.
I mean, we used to be roommates.
I know. Again, but how old were we?
That's true. We were like 25.
Yeah, I'm fucking 40. I turned 40 recently. So no, they're a fucking roommate. Are you insane? Like, but that's what I'm talking about. But I'm running into guys, that might be.
I would say that might be a little picky, because just because someone has a roommate doesn't mean they're not steadily employed.
No, right? I know, but it's just annoying to me, because then I'm like, well, now everything has to come over to my house. Because we can't go to yours. Yeah. It's fucking awkward because there's a dude next door. Whatever the fuck the situation is.
You could have a doctorate in something you could have like a doctorate in social work or something, and work for an organization where or work for a not-profit. You could be highly educated and not necessarily make a whole lot of money.
Yeah, that ain't gonna work for me.
Well, there you go. At least you know that.
I know. That's, again, probably why I'm picky. So if you're a scrub, that ain't gonna work.
Well, I had a pharmacist. I worked with a pharmacist who, she was like, "I'm never gonna date anybody that makes less than me." It's like, you're gonna have a hard time because you make a shitload of money.
I mean, I would say to live comfortably here where we're at, if you're not making 100,000 plus a year, you're probably, I don't know, like,
I make way under that personally.
But your wife.
That's true. That's true.
So you did it right, man.
Yeah. I got the sugar mama. I knew what I was doing.
I know, that's what I'm saying. If you're out there, there are some guys that are pursuing me that I definitely know would be sugar daddies, but I'm like,
see, money isn't everything,
it's
right?
not, but again, it's not everything. There's
right.
Other
you don't
things.
want them to be a deadbeat, right, where you're gonna have to like fully support them.
Yeah.
But then, it just depends on what you want later on. Or they can contribute in other ways, but do you have other ways that you need them to contribute?
Well,
right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason the money side's important is because there's a certain quality of life that I like to live. And then on top of that, to truly be able to spend quality time with people, you need time, and people that don't make enough money don't have as much time. I feel like people that don't have time, they don't have money. I'm like, well, what the fuck? What are you doing, man? How are you living this life? It's like
spending all the time working probably at a job that doesn't necessarily pay them a whole lot, but that doesn't mean that it's a menial job necessarily. I'm just saying, there's people. I don't know. I don't know how a lot of people afford to live in San Diego. I mean, we don't technically live in San Diego anymore, so we couldn't afford to live in the city of San Diego at that point. I mean, actually, in retrospect, but whatever. That doesn't matter.
But no, I know, I get it. I get it. I mean, I've gotten pretty picky, but it's just because the reality of what the type of lifestyle I want to live, and And, now that I know most of these guys anyway, they're on a fucking dating site or avoidance. So I'm like, well, great.
Well, how do you know it's all the avoidance that have all the money?
I don't know if they have all the money. I'm guessing they don't. They
Well,
probably avoid money.
Well, how do you know all the people that have
They
the
avoid
money
people and they avoid money.
aren't just avoidance? Because they don't spend all their time in relationships so they can make all that motherfucking money.
True. Yeah, but then I have to be with that avoidant, and that sounds like I've already done that. And it's awful.
Or you have to give up the cash end of it, right? Like that's.
Why can't I have it all?
I'm not saying you can't, but it just might take longer.
I know. I'm gonna be dead.
That's the issue. Is that
I'm on my deathbed and meet the right guy.
You want to have it all, but you don't want to have it all. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know.
You don't want to do it all.
So hopefully this is my PSA for my dating life, that you're getting an idea of what I'm looking for.
If anybody out there is listening, this is what we want right now.
Yes.
Right. Sorry, I'm reaching at the computer. It keeps going dark on me, and I don't know why. I don't know. I mean, what else did you want to touch on?
I don't know. I feel like I did a lot of this because I'm in the dating world, and I think these are things that are important.
I agree. They're definitely things that are important. I think that attached, I would have liked to see more of an approach for, because they kept talking about how they were going to talk about people that are already in long-term relationships, but I felt like they never really did.
I think they forgot, like they mentioned it and they forgot to talk about it.
Later in this book, we're going to talk about it, and they talk about like real briefly, like, well, if you can't figure it out, you're kind of fucked.
Yeah, you're already married, so deal with it.
But then, I want to touch on that a little bit.
Sure, please do.
I think that, I think the effective communication is probably the most important part, and that, the love languages is about listening to the other person and communicating for yourself. And it's not, and I think when you're when you're really in a relationship, you have to make it not fully about you, right? Like that's what it is to be, for me personally, that's what it was to like be married, is that, well, this can be no more than half about me.
Yeah.
And then we have kids, and that becomes a significant portion of it. And you have to remember to take in consideration your partner when you have kids, right? And then you have to rely on your partner to then reciprocate, and then they do for you. And I think that's what I got out of Attached a lot, was that's okay, that it's okay to need that reciprocation, and that it doesn't have to be, I take care of myself first and then I may have something left for you. That it can, and then when you combine the two books together, that it might really be a lot better to be, well, I'm going to be about you, and then I need you to be about me.
Yeah.
And that's what makes a great lasting relationship. Because I think, just nothing's perfect, right? Living life is difficult. Dealing with people in any way is difficult, but I always hear the comment like, relationships are hard. Yeah, but
being single is hard too.
Every relationship is dealing with people is hard, right?
I
so
agree.
Relationships, I think it's about you finding the person that you're willing to do for, and then feeling like you're also done for, like in the sense that things are being done for you.
Yeah.
And that, where they talk in the 5 languages, where he talks about your love tank.
Oh yeah, the love tank.
Because if you just give and give, and you get nothing in return, then that's exhausting, and you just feel empty, and it becomes empty. And I think that's what has made my marriage last. I mean, I was just thinking about the fact that we're at 11 years. 10 years is a big milestone where a lot of marriages don't make it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that is because we are very much concerned with the other person.
Yeah.
And willing to put the other person first. And we don't necessarily burden the fact that, like, we're concerned with each other's happiness, but we don't burden them with having to be happy.
Yeah.
Because that's, and then what I feel like the books don't touch on enough is just the difficulties in living that can have an impact on all these different aspects that we've talked about, right? Like, whether it's some level of mental illness or, generalized anxiety or whatever else you have.
Difficulties.
Right, financial difficulties, that things that come up that can put a strain on things, and not necessarily, you can be all in tune with your love languages and understand your attachment style, but then you lose your job.
Mm-hmm.
And then what's going to, that's going to put a whole new stress that may make you turn into an anxious person, or an anxious attachment style, or, you may not be able to provide that love language at that point because you're dealing with this event.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what's a little bit missing, is that you shouldn't need to get it all the time, though. Right? And you need to be able to give space for the other person when they're not able to give. That's also okay.
Yeah. I mean, I had that thought too, especially with the 5 love languages, is like there, multiple times in the examples, like when the wife would come up, or it usually seems like it was the wife, and
it was more often than not.
It seemed like, at least in the examples he was giving, and like Dr. Chapman, we've been married 30 years and money's not an issue, and like he said that a lot. I'm like, well, yeah, but then so all these people are lucky enough that the husband they're provided
everything else is going great.
Everything else is going great. So yeah, but they just don't talk to each other. They don't know how to love each other, and they feel empty, even though they're in like a 30-year marriage. Which, I again appreciate. Which that's kind of what the book was designed for, because I'm sure there are a lot of people that none of those things are the issue. So why are there still issues? Fair. Right? Like, that makes sense. Like, if everything's provided for, the bills are paid, everything's fine, kids are taken care of.
Right. I should be seeing this as the perfect life, but I don't feel like it's the perfect life.
So, true. Which I get. That's why that's the where he came from with the book, right? Being a marriage counselor and whatnot. But I guess that means somebody needs to write a book that has to do with.
Well, he did the singles one, right?
But the singles one doesn't really talk about.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's fine. No, not at all. No, because basically what he's doing in the singles one, again, I haven't finished it all the way yet, but they're taking each language and applying it and like fleshing it out a lot more for when you are single, and what it really looks like, in the day-to-day world. But still, you don't really hear him bring up like, which I guess if you're when people are, and I have a good friend that talks about this. She's like, sometimes when I find myself wanting to dive into things like attached and the 5 love languages, she's like, that's a luxury and a privilege. She's like, that means you're, the fact that you can even have the time and wherewithal because you're not struggling in all these other areas is a blessing. And I'm like, thanks for reminding me, because it's true. It is true.
Right. And because he doesn't talk about what it's like dealing with kids.
Yeah.
Right. And
there is a 5 love languages for kids. He has another book for that. I just haven't listened to it, but
just dealing with the stress of, he doesn't talk. I don't think he talks enough about the other stresses of life, and I don't think attached does either.
No, I know these are people that are like, everything else seems to be going fine,
right? Except
this. So. Which again makes sense. You're like, how is all your other life put together, and you can't figure this shit out?
Right. And it is the focus of their books, right?
Yeah.
To be fair.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's I think it caused me to struggle to identify to an extent with just some of the books as a whole, the books kind of as a whole, is that like, I just don't feel like I'm any of these people that exist in these books.
No, I understand. I mean, that's why I thought this would probably be interesting from his perspective to mine, because I very easily get caught up in the romance of all of it. Like, there's romance in learning about these things and how to apply them, and test out the theories, and like I find that a form of, like, it's a little bit of a challenge and a compelling bit of, I don't know why I call it romance, but it's a little bit romantic to be able to even do these things and learn about these things and try to apply them and to think about them.
Yeah, for sure.
So I get caught up in those things easily. With a lot of topics I get very quickly passionate about, which is why it's interesting when sometimes you point out and you find those little things where I'm like, oh shit, yeah, that's true. Because I'll catch it, but I'm so like when you point things out, sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, there was that part. But I'm like my brain will quick to be like, well, shove that aside. That's not what this is about right now.
I would consider you to be generally more positive person.
Very much.
I would consider myself to be generally more negative.
Toxic positivity is what my therapist called me at one point.
I would not. I don't think I would have ever considered you to be someone that, because I like hate that toxic positivity, and so I would never have considered you that. But I find myself seeing the negative in things a lot, and just my personality.
Which is why I think any topic we pick is always going to be fun because of that,
like no,
dualism,
Like I was a douchebag for making that woman have sex with her husband.
Where I'm like, yeah, but their marriage is happy now. Or like, maybe. I don't
Somehow
know.
magically after 18 months of
being raped.
Joyless sex. I don't think it's quite rape. I mean, she was a willing participant, rape. But at the same time, I just feel like that. I don't know. I mean,
unwilling participant.
He's just, it wasn't in her interest, and it's just like, well, or she was not necessarily interested in it. But he saw it as in her best interest.
Like basically he's like, hey, if you truly want to try to save your marriage and that's truly your husband's love language, even though I've never spoke to him, because that was the other aspect. I think he had to go off of whatever she said. And
I think that's I think that, I don't know. I just thought that was kind of a radical suggestion.
And I'm almost shocked because I feel like as a marriage counselor, I would almost make it mandatory. I'm like, we need you both here. Because, like, really, like, if you're going to truly assess...
unwilling,
yeah, they're unwilling, but if you're going to really assess anything, and if you're unwilling, then you have to be, I imagine, doctor, not a doctor, whatever, like, you have to really tread lightly about how you give advice without really ever hearing the other party in a marriage,
I think he does kind of acknowledge it, but then he still I don't know. I just had a real issue with that advice, but I feel like I feel like I'll keep going on with it. Let's we move on. So, I mean, should we a good place to?
I think it is a good place to wrap it up. I mean,
such wonderful of notes.
I would say we're gonna end on the rape note. No, it wasn't rape. Wasn't rape. Sorry, it's just fun to say it because it's hilarious. So, the overall was, check out the books, read them. I think they're gonna at least add some value to you. If not, well, we fucking warned you in the title of the show. And watch out if you're single for those avoidance. Watch out for,
if you are an avoidant, make it clear you need space, and don't be afraid of the fact that you need space. And if the person isn't going to be willing to give it to you, then don't waste their time.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it's all about being self-aware. It takes some time. Mindfulness is all the rage these days. So take some time to think about yourself and really think about it, and not just,
blanket assess.
Don't just think negative or don't just think positive. Try to find both in you, because I think it'll be worth it in the end.
Yeah. So, and then of course, if you're listening, watching, feel free to comment if you have any experience in these. If you've already read these books, one or the other, and you'd like to comment, please do.
If you really hated us, you can feel free to comment that too. Maybe we'll invite you on.
Yeah, and we'll be like, hey,
if you have a problem with anything, I'd love to hear it and bring you on to discuss it.
I think he just wants a brawl for the next episode.
I like to learn. Brawl. So if someone thinks that they have something to teach me because they think I'm an idiot, then I'd love to talk to you, because
See how he's all about that, where I'm like, me and conflict, I'm like,
I don't necessarily see it as conflict. I see it as an opportunity. I mean, I don't know. I feel like as I was about to say this, I feel like it's kind of a douchey thing to say, but I feel like it is an opportunity to learn.
Oh, God.
Yeah, exactly. I heard it as I was about to say it, so either way, please like and subscribe.
Yes, like and subscribe and comment and talk shit about Nick and his...
Yes, please do.
Please do. Co-host on our podcast. So thanks for tuning in. Again, I'm Cynthia.
And I'm Nicholas.
And
this could go either way.
This did go.
Yeah, I fucked it up.
It's okay. It went either way. It could have gone. It could have worked.
That could have gone better, but it went that way. It did.
It did. All right.
All right.
See you guys next time. Bye.